ladies and gentlemen, if I can invite you then to welcome onto the stage our final panel entitled Redefining Corporate Practices for Doing Good. And this time moderated by the co-chair of this event, Professor Rajesh Chandy from the London Business School. Please welcome him and his panel.
We have a 55 minutes, a very exciting period. So let me just mention the folks on the panel here. Jim Clifton, CEO and chairman of the Gallup company. Monique Villa, CEO of Thomson Reuters Foundation. Senator George Mitchell, in addition to being a United States Senator, also a distinguished member of commerce and business. Then followed by Tom Kaplan, again, distinguished career in mining with the Electrum Group, but a particular passion in the world of endangered species and cats in particular. And Hadil Ibrahim, with a particular emphasis on Africa and governance and leadership. Now, I also asked our panelists if we could go from the lofty world of ideas to the specific world of examples that we could take away as we head out. And so if I could ask each of the panelists, given the theme of this session, if we could do the two things. One is a bit of a setup about the world we live in today and where we are and where we're headed, and how that is perceived. So this is our last panel for the day, so a bit of reflection. And specifically, given the theme of the panel around corporations and their role in doing good, something about what corporations are doing in the world for social outcomes. So let me start with the first question, first issue, which is around the world we live in today. And for this, we have a polling question for you. And it's exactly the same poll as what was given to people in various parts of the world, the United States, in the United Kingdom. And the polling question is about the percentage of the world population that lives in extreme poverty. So here's the question. In the last 20 years, the proportion of the world population living in extreme poverty has it almost doubled, remained more or less the same, or almost halved? Go ahead. Okay, so some optimism about the world. So I would say that's about 60 or so percent of you feel that the percentage has been of extreme poverty has either remained the same or gone half. The actual number it's almost halved. Yeah, and yet, if you ask people, this is data from the United States. If you ask a random sample of Americans, 66% feel it's almost doubled. Only 5% feel it's almost half, which is the reality. In Britain, the number is about 10% think it's almost half, which is the accurate figure. So you're more aware than the general population, perhaps because you have been actively involved in creating change and tackling these extraordinary problems, but the world at large does not appear to be. So that's point number one. Point number two is about the role of corporations. So in the last 20 years, lots of things have happened. Certainly, privatization and the world of private enterprise has become much more widespread around the world. In states that used to be suspicious of private enterprise, there has been a lot more, shall we say, liberalization and greater role of the private sector, whether it's just purely commercial or even in the world of aid. But other things have happened as well, so greater democratization, etc. So the second question, and this is based on a poll that was done on the Philanthropreneurship Forum website, was about the following. what do you think of current social responsibility practices? And this is not for you to respond to right now, because the poll is actually on live now. You can do so. You can respond afterwards on the forum website. And here are the three questions there. What do you think of three responses to the following question? What do you think of current corporate social responsibility practices? It's more of a PR stunt. In most cases, CSR actions and outcomes lack transparency. And the more optimistic note, current practices are effective. And here's the actual response to those three questions from our poll. So, by far, most folks are not responding yes to the current question of current practices are effective. There's some suspicion or at least concern about transparency about the corporations. Now, this said, once again, when there have been very closely controlled, very cleanly done studies of the impact of commerce and greater commerce on social good, they have tended to suggest that this has been a good thing. So to our panelists, who are distinguished members of the corporate fraternity, as well as have had linkages in various forms, not only to the corporate fraternity, but themselves as entrepreneurs, or as members of government, or as members of foundations, I requested that each of our members give one example that might perhaps illuminate the role of corporations in doing good. Could you give us a single example, a striking example that comes to mind of a set of corporate actions leading to good outcomes for society? Senator Mitchell, maybe I could start with you. Your background with not only in government, but with Disney, with Piper Law, and other places, and of course, more generally in society as well. What's the most striking example that comes to your mind?
Well, the law firm with which I'm associated is a worldwide firm, a product of a series of mergers. And we decided early on to emphasize pro bono activity. And we created a separate, independent, nonprofit organization. And after much internal discussion and external input, I decided on a very specific target. We try to help societies in transition, mostly undeveloped or developing countries, to establish independent and effective rule of law and particularly independent judicial systems. We believe that in the long run, external investment will go where there is stability and the rule of law, and so it's essential to their economic growth and well-being. We have many projects all around the world. The principal areas of activity have been in Kosovo, Myanmar, several countries in East Africa, and in Central and Latin America, where not only nations, but specifically their judicial systems are under great stress due to the violence and corruption that's associated with trade in narcotics. And we've had very receptive, in fact, we have more demand than we can meet. And it's proven very effective for us because we have over 800 lawyers who've actually participated in this. It's become a great recruiting tool because young people want to act in a way that, as the phrase is often used, do well but do good also. And we're thinking, we've just celebrated our 10th anniversary of this organization, and we're going to expand it significantly because of the great demand that we now face.
So, that's a great example, thank you, and it relates to what Monique has been doing as well. But before I get to Monique, could you walk us through, you have a unique vantage point that many of us don't. As chairman of DLJ Piper, how does one sell this idea within a corporation? You mentioned recruiting as one reason. Just there's a stream of thought that says the role of the corporation is to do good for the shareholder. The shareholder will make a lot of money, perhaps, if you do the right things, and then that will lead to charity on the part of the shareholder, or as he or she may decide. The company will pay taxes. That will lead to good through the role of government. How do you sell work like this, pro bono work? Or what? Can you give us a glimpse of the kinds of discussions that happen within DLJ Piper?
Honestly, this was easy.
Yeah.
Once we settled the important issues of money, everything else fell into place. People want to do this. People most people begin life wanting, I guess, the universal definitions of success: wealth, fame, status, acquisition. But everyone will tell you that the more you achieve of those, the more you realize that real fulfillment comes from being part of a cause larger than one's self-interest, in which you can have the great inner satisfaction of doing something, quote, good in life. And lawyers are different in many respects, but not in this one, from everyone else. They want to do good, and we, as I said, we have now, it's expanding dramatically. We have to control the growth, actually, so that we don't lose the quality and the effectiveness. So it really was not a very difficult sell. And the final point is, I find in corporate philanthropy, all you have to do is to identify some degree of self-interest for the corporation. That's not hard to do in the age in which we live, because given the massive increase in trade across borders, the size and growth of the world economy, branding is important. And if you can enhance your brand by doing good things, then you can satisfy yourself that doing good works is good business for your entity.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Also, I just read an article you may have come across as well about burnout rates and depression, etc., among lawyers. The legal profession has the worst rates of sort of mental challenges due to professional activities. No, the reason I say that is because I'll bring that. The only group among all of the legal groups that had, was positive on that was those who were doing pro bono work, those who were doing, or indeed for government work. And so the point is actually it's not only recruiting, perhaps implicit in what you're saying, is also retention and mental health and fulfillment. Thank you. Monique, so you've been involved in many things in journalism as well as in law, but some of your signature things, especially after taking over as CEO of the Thomson Reuters Foundation, has been with Trust Law and Trust Women. Examples?
So it's wonderful because what Senator Mitchell was saying about pro bono is something I discovered 6 years ago, just after taking over the foundation and having more or less a sheet of white paper saying, the CEO told me, it was Tom Glosser, and he told me, take the foundation and transform it into something that will give a culture to the new company, Thomson Reuters. So Reuters Foundation was doing training of journalists, and Thomson was giving gifts, more or less. So one day in Washington, discussing with a lawyer, not from the LA Piper, but another one, he explained to me pro bono, and I was so taken aback by the amount of pro bono that the American law firms do, up to minimum 2.5% of their revenue in giving free hours to people who need a lawyer and cannot afford it. I thought it was remarkable. So I created Trust Law, which was launched exactly 5 years ago, to spread the practice of pro bono worldwide. And today we have more than 530 law firms members working for the best NGOs and the best social enterprise that we vet in now 177 countries. So in India, for instance, we have 55 law firms working pro bono for social enterprise. In mainland China, 14 of them, which is, it was not the culture at all. So everywhere in Africa and so forth. This is a huge impact. So we were discussing this morning measures, and it's very difficult to find measures. But just if you think that an NGO, a fantastic social enterprise indeed, in the Philippines, fighting human trafficking and slavery, became a member of Trust Law and told me, we want to push for a law on domestic workers for them to have a minimum wage and be other than almost slavery state. We put the research on Trust Law cross borders. It was across 12 countries. White & Case took the research. DLA Piper is as active as White & Case, so they are huge in Trust Law all over the world. White & Case took that one and did a research in 12 countries on what were their domestic laws and how a domestic law could be the best for the Philippines. we published the research, very authoritative research, and the NGO, which is the Versailles Forum, it's Cecilia Obanda, she's a fantastic lady, she pushed it and did data advocacy with all government MPs, etc. And the law for domestic labor was voted. That has completely transformed the life of 2 million workers. So very difficult to put dollars in front of that. You know, the law firms told us that in 5 years they have spent $70 million in hours of brain of their lawyers. But it's impossible to put dollars on the benefit for all the NGOs and social enterprise for which they do all their legal needs, and helping them to have bigger impact and to do a better job. And it's impossible to put a number on a law for domestic workers, except that 2 million of workers are now decently paid in the Philippines.
And how's that being perceived within Thomson Reuters, do you think? I
Oh,
realize
they love
it's a
it.
separate
Of course,
entity.
they love it because it reflects well on the company. The foundation is completely separate.
Right, I understand that.
So we are a separate legal entity. Thomson Reuters give me $6 million a year, but all the additional funding, I find it elsewhere. So it makes it much more sustainable, and it forces into big partnerships on everything we do.
So you're leveraging the money. Behaving philanthropreneurially.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you very much.
Trying.
Jim, you're CEO of a large corporation. You also have a particular interest in very young entrepreneurs. Any examples?
So we have the Gallup organization, and then we have something called the Clifton Foundation. And so we put those together, but we aligned our mission and purpose, which has to do with jobs and entrepreneurship. We put $30 million into a special center at a school to create a Juilliard. The only reason I tell you that, coming right off what you said, is that our company's employee-owned. And so for us to take, I don't know it's a lot of money anymore, but to take $15 million out, if you're a shareholder at Gallup, you might go, hey, what are you doing putting that there? But to George's point, maybe I should say senator. To the senator's point, people feel real good. You can recruit the real stars with Millennials aren't as interested in pay as they are purpose, and that's a big sociological shift. Maybe I'll say one other thing. This was shocking. One of the most shocking things I've ever found in data at the government, in the U.S. government, but Americans have stopped starting companies. And so the total number of new business starts is decreasing, and that's probably why we have fewer full-time jobs as a percent of adults than we've had in 40 years. That's how miserable the job situation is. But if you look at where green sprouts come from, they come from new business starts and new business shoot-ups, nowhere else. Big business doesn't create, and God bless all big business. We need them, but they don't create any new jobs at all. So we've been focusing on that very specific. We're trying to make that more intentional. But as wonderful as the millennials are, I think they're better employees than we are. They have more purpose and all that. They don't start companies. And so somebody's got to fix that. That's probably the reason why the whole GDP of the world is increasing at a decreasing rate, because we've just stopped starting companies and nobody really knows why. But so we focused our both missions on that.
So in this particular case, there is the Gallup organization, and then there's the Clifton Foundation, and the two, do they have, besides your presence there, do they have any natural sort of linkages as you see them?
I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. What I mean is in each of the other cases, the work that was being, the social good work that was being done was also good for retention, brand, etc.
Yeah. A lot of our professionals participate, teach classes, and all that.
Okay.
The thing that we found, maybe the most amazing. I've been CEO for about 26 or 27 years, something like that. But the most amazing poll I've ever seen at Gallup. So our company was founded by an academic named George Gallup from University of Iowa, then Northwestern, then Columbia. But he had a question about what is the will or the great American dream, and then we expanded it to the whole world. What do you want out of life? We can only go back 80 years, but what it used to be was peace, freedom, and to have a family. And that's just kind of what explained what life, the meaning of life has been. It just changed. And I'll tell you what it changed to. And when I tell you, first of all, it's going to sound kind of like a subtle shift, but it changed from peace, freedom, having a family, to having a good job. So now a good job is more important than having a family or freedom or peace. But that's probably why, that's why birth rates, when I was born, women averaged 5 kids, now they average 2.5. Kids are getting married later than they ever have, or they don't get married at all, but it's all because of this new global will, which is to have a good job. So we're trying to focus on that.
Great jobs, yeah. Tom, you have a long career in mining resources, and you're doing remarkable thing with endangered animals. Examples of corporates having an impact or not?
There's some excellent examples of corporates that have given back to the species that in many ways are so iconic. Not just that they've contributed to what Senator Mitchell was referring to, branding, but also have contributed something to the way they view their own mission. Just this past week, the foundation which my wife and I created, Panthera, which focuses on the world's wild cats and protecting their landscapes, because cats lend themselves to being able to protect vast ecosystems and habitats under their umbrella. Just this last week, we announced a strategic alliance with arguably the greatest luxury brand in the world, Hermes. And we are kicking off with a series of events which are taking us literally from Greenwich, Connecticut, all the way through to Shanghai, Mumbai, various cities in Europe, etc. They viewed this, and this is not cynicism, they viewed this as a way of being able to give back to an artist who had created many of their iconic images. The scarves and other accessories which bear the images of big cats by Hermes are world famous. And they felt that this was an opportunity for them to be able to have a very big impact. And so they decided, and they chose us, because they said, you're the brand that we want to be associated with, which of course, considering out of whose mouth that comes, that's about the best validation that you could possibly hope for. So even though we're only 10 years old next year, we've positioned ourselves as the go-to name in that aspect of landscape conservation. The fact that they came in and have joined us, we think has the potential to be a game changer, because there's nobody who can gainsay the importance of Hermes. But I'll give you other examples, if I may, as counterpoints. To my knowledge, they are the first major house to say that we're going to do the right thing, and despite the fact that there's no patent on the look of leopard, there's nobody who's putting any money into leopard conservation. Panthera is the only organization in the world which has a range-wide program in leopard conservation. And the reason is because even though it's the most ubiquitous fashion statement in the world today, whether it's Hermes, Dolce, Prada, all the way down to Sears and Target in the United States, the leopard is the most persecuted big cat in the world. And what we want people to do is to see past the spots and to actually see the leopard, because this really has an impact on cat conservation globally. We know that a concerted attempt by a corporation to align with the right species and wildlife can be huge. We had an incident which happened over the summer, some of you may be aware of. There was this lion called Cecil in Zimbabwe. I've had from empresses through to cab drivers talk to me about Cecil. Thank God he had a name.
And it was one that your foundation helped support, at least indirectly.
Yes, the study that Cecil was a participant in was carried out by Oxford University's Wildlife Conservation Research Unit, which my wife and I endowed. The money was coming through Panthera. So as much as anybody, and you're never owning these things, nor should you, but as much as anybody, we had this story. And so Cecil became a transformative moment. And despite having put $100 million into wildlife conservation, the $100,000 that we were using in matching to other donors achieved an incredible currency. For the first time ever in the history of Oxford University, the computer came down. Millions and millions of hits on Oxford University's system. Now, we are holding a summit at Oxford with Panthera, with Wild Crew, with all the other stakeholders in lion conservation the first quarter of next year. If anyone wants to be able to reach millions of people who've expressed an interest in what the conservation outcome of this will be, and I assure you there'll be a very strong one, by all means come to me. We could use corporate sponsorship. You would own the leopard. Until Cecil was slaughtered, people didn't understand that the lion, because a lot of people have the ability to go out and see lions on safari, is the big cat that's disappearing in plain sight. Their numbers have gone from 200,000 to 20,000. In 26 African countries in which they used to be plentiful, they're now extinct. There are only 4 in which there are over 1,000 leopards. 40% of them remain in one country, in Tanzania, which is awfully close to Al-Shabaab. The point is that people see this. I went to Apple. Rupert Murdoch introduced me to Steve Jobs. There's an interesting story in its own right. Because Apple, as many people know, used to use big cats for their operating systems, tigers, lions, snow leopards. I offered to match them dollar for dollar. They get all the credit, their logo over everything. 50 countries around the world just like that. Steve was not philanthropic. They say that his wife is. There are great examples of corporate philanthropy, Hermes being extremely topical. And there are others where people have just come up short, even though they're using the images of these animals where even a few pennies could do so much good.
Thank you. Thank you. Hadil, on the topic on Africa, but from a very different perspective, leadership, governance, and your own involvement with corporations, whether Celtel or others. Examples?
Thank you so much. I'm going to pick up on 2 themes that I see emerging across the panel. One is around jobs, and one is around brand values and consistency, from your core business all the way through to your social responsibility. When it comes to jobs, and I think it was brought up well by Strive and others on the previous panel, in Africa we have to create 20 million jobs every year to meet current demand. We have 20 million young people entering the labor market annually. And you mentioned Celtel, and many people talk about Celtel as a company that had a transformational technological impact. Maybe 2 of the things I'm most proud of with Celtel as a company was how it treated its employees.
Can I just for those
Sure.
who don't know, so Celtel is the cellular provider that your dad, Mo Ibrahim, helped found and really transformed the world of communications in Africa. The lovely book on it is More Talk, Less Walk, which nicely illustrates.
Thank you, nicely summarized, thank you. So Celtel was an early Pan-African telecom provider. And what Celtel actually did was create secure, high-quality jobs. 200,000 informal jobs were created around it, but Celtel actually won a prize from the IFC for creating the global gold standard for treating its employees well and for corporate good governance, and that's something I'm very proud of. So it's not just about creating jobs, it's about creating good jobs, it's about creating secure jobs that treat employees well. The second thing that I wanted to talk about around corporate social responsibility, in 10 countries that Celtel operated in, they were the largest taxpayer in the country. They were not the largest company in the country, but they were the largest taxpayer. And this gets to a very important point about core values. $60 billion leaves Africa illicitly every year. 60 billion, and that's a conservative estimate. Only 5% of that is corruption. 20 to 25% is transnational crime. 60 to 65% is multinationals tax evading, tax avoiding, and transfer pricing. So before you talk about corporate social responsibility as building a school, make sure the way in which you do business is consistent with corporate social responsibility.
Thank you.
So those are the 2 things I would come back to. Creating jobs, secure, secure jobs
Absolutely.
with full rights for employees, and being a good corporate citizen and living up to your responsibility.
Thank you very much. Excellent point. Monique.
Yeah, I'm a true believer in companies can do a lot of good, and they can. Imagine just 1 second that the big corporations that 40 years ago started to outsource their production and many of their services in the developing world because they were looking for cheap labor, would decide to really clean their supply chain from forced labor. We have today 36 million slaves in the world, and 75% of them are not in sex labor, they are in forced labor, working for big corporations very often, and they don't know because it is hidden down their supply chain. So it's a very, very difficult issue to address. But some of them have started to address it, you know, and they have not gone burst. Because good labor and good practices go with improving your bottom line. And, you know, I will just take one example. It's Lush. Lush is a cosmetic company which is very successful in many countries. And they have discovered suddenly that, you know, in all cosmetics we all wear, you have 60% of mica. And the mica production, you have a lot of mica. Mica production is 60% in India. And this is a place where you have a lot of slavery and forced labor because children are better at taking mica out of the rocks than adults. So a lot of child slavery. Lush has decided not to use mica any longer. They didn't go burst, they found something else, and they are acting for good. Imagine if companies would really look at how in their supply chain it goes for the fishing we are all buying in supermarkets, etc., etc. So companies, big corporations can be a force for good, and we are acting for that. So at the Trust Women conference that is one day dedicated to slavery, we have launched, for instance, this year, 2 weeks ago, the Stop Slavery Award that we will give next year with Anish Kapoor, is designing the award, and we will give it to the best corporation looking at cleaning their supply chain. Not that they are slave-free, because I think that nobody today, even Hermes, can say they are slave-free, but you know, looking at cleaning their supply chain, and we will give this award per industry to start a virtuous circle, because I think that the good example people want to follow. It's you know, yeah.
This is terrific. If I could abstract some of the things you mentioned from those wonderfully evocative examples, corporations can do good by just engaging in the kinds of indeed commercial or pro bono actions that they are best equipped to do. Take, for example, law and how you subsidize it or what you do there. That has a huge impact. There's wealth transfer that happens to shareholders that leads to wonderful philanthropic initiatives, whether with wild animals or with entrepreneurs, to employees, and do good through employees and treating them well, actually indeed paying them well, rewarding them, etc., through government, taxes, through charity, the CSR type things. But the two things that each of you kind of mentioned is the power to convene. So it's not just what I do, but what other law firms do. It's what Hermes does with others, or Celtel, and just the power to convene others and bring and work together, and the power to inspire, right? So because I see something and it has the Hermes name on it, or it has the Reuters name on it, or it can actually strike a chord, and you have larger platforms than many other. But this raises the question, before we go to audience questions, this still raises the puzzle then. Why is there this disconnect between what apparently corporations are doing, or at least some are doing, and the sense that actually most corporate actions for good are rather cynical or don't exist at all? Why is it, we saw from the polls that the public doesn't seem to believe that a lot of what corporates do are either effective or for the right reasons. Can you speculate on why that might be?
Can I just read something, which is a Deloitte report last year? And this is going to change for sure, because the Deloitte report shows that the majority of people under the age of 30 believe the number one purpose of business is to benefit society and to solve critical issues such as income inequality, climate change, and corruption. So if this is true, things are going to change.
They believe it should be. Is it they believe it should be, but at the same time, is there a sense?
They're acting for that.
Yeah.
This is what Senator Mitchell said. The students who quit a law firm, who stop the law school and go to a law firm, the first question they ask is, what do you do to give back to society?
Senator Mitchell.
I think first there's reason for cynicism because many are cynical about it. That's the reality.
Many corporations are, or many in the...
Many, yes.
Yeah.
There's a thin line in human life between intense faith and total cynicism. And so that's the reality. You can't generalize in that respect. Secondly, the most effective way to appeal to a corporation is to identify a benefit that aligns with its self-interest. So by definition, if you're asking them to act in a way that is self-interested, even if it does good, it will arouse cynicism in some who are suspicious of all corporate activities. I should mention one other thing that you didn't discuss that I've had some experience with through my association with the Walt Disney Company, where I served as chairman.
Please.
You don't have to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of knowledge out there, particularly in NGOs, that specialize in specific areas. We decided to establish a program to encourage early intellectual stimulation and early education in computer sciences on the theory that's absolutely essential for success in life in the 21st century and beyond. And we do it in partnership with an organization, a nonprofit called Code.org, and it provided that education to millions of Americans. It has saved us a tremendous amount of internal activity to learn what somebody else already knew. We do the same thing in the distribution of books. There's something called, an organization called First Books, and through them we've distributed 25 million books already, an accelerating number, to children at an early age, because as we heard earlier, I think Chelsea Clinton mentioned it, about the formation of the brain early in life, and science has taught us that what happens in the first months and years of a human being's life can have a decisive effect upon that person's ultimate capacity. And reading, the acquisition of knowledge, the intellectual stimulation that comes with language and words and interaction is crucial. Now, it fits a target audience for Disney, of course, young children. So if you want to look at that, if you begin with a cynical outlook, you'd say, well, they're doing it because it helps them. Indeed, it does, but it doesn't lessen the amount of good that they're doing.
Yeah, so enlightened self-interest is always, can be a positive thing. And your second point is about collaboration with NGOs, and there are lots of folks from the NGO community here. Can any of you speak to that point about collaboration? So when you have, a large corporation has the power of scale, has resources, but also has a certain focus for justifiable, perhaps, reasons. NGOs don't have the resources, but often, as you say, have the ability or the entrepreneurial spirit to do things creatively. Can you speak to any interactions between large corporations and NGOs, and what lessons you might draw from those? Adil?
Sure. I've spent my career working in development, and recently I've been doing some work around the humanitarian assistance sector, and I raised this in this room because I think we're all so busy being developmental that we sometimes forget our humanity and we forget about the humanitarian sector. So to put it in context, 122 million people needed life-saving assistance last year, 122 million. If that was a country, it would be the 11th largest country in the world. This is a country of invisible people. These are people living in refugee camps for 25 years, 35 years, 45 years. The budget with which we look after those people is $25 billion. 1% of that budget comes from the private sector, probably less. Now, 60-something% of that budget comes from 10 countries. So much as we like to talk about like a post-OECD DAC world full of philanthropreneurs, when it comes down to the crises, when it comes to Syria, when it comes to an earthquake, when it comes to a hurricane, this community is not anywhere to be seen. So to come to your point about collaboration, I think it goes two ways. I think the ask that the UN or NGOs have been making of the private sector is wrong, frankly. I think they've been asking you to write checks. I don't think that speaks to this issue of core competence. I think it's really impressive that MasterCard are now, with the World Food Programme, giving out something like 1.5 million MasterCards across refugees in the Middle East that can be used for cash-based assistance. Now, what that does, as well as cutting out graft down the supply chain, it means that we can track the spending of these people and then suddenly identify the market opportunities. And you can't say that, you know, we have 500,000 people living in one refugee camp. You can't say there's not an opportunity there. We just haven't yet figured out what that market opportunity is. So I think the NGO and the development or the humanitarian community have been asking the wrong questions, but I also think that there's been a real reluctance by the private sector to get involved with these messier, difficult, complex things. And we now live in a world, as we're seeing with children being washed up on beaches in Turkey, where we can't sort of hold it at a distance and say, I much prefer to be in my comfort zone as a philanthrepreneur.
And just to extend your point, just let me make sure I understand. So that's a pretty stunning statistic, 1% of humanitarian assistance coming from the private sector. Is it, linking back to Senator Mitchell's point, is it that many corporations don't yet see the enlightened self-interest in engaging in that, or is there a role for NGOs to sort of highlight what it is? What is the solution to something like that?
I think part of the solution is our collective responsibility. That 25 billion budget was only 2 billion 15 years ago. We have this huge escalation in vulnerable people around the world. The average amount of time a displaced person is displaced for is now 17 years. Someone crossing the Syrian border into Turkey is, statistically speaking, not going home till after we've achieved the SDGs, which begs the question, how are we going to meet these global goals when these 122 million people are not factored in? They're the bottom of the pyramid that we can't even see. So I would say that this isn't a phenomenon. I worked in development. I now realize that I have to take a responsibility to say, how do we take people out of vulnerable situations and bring them into the mainstream? But the private sector is the only creator of jobs. And when you talk to refugees and displaced people, you know, I talked about that country of 122 million people, the 11th largest country in the world. Almost none of them are in employment. And you talk to Syrian refugees, a huge proportion of them have degrees. So the real challenge around all of this is saying displaced people, refugees are a global public good. And the way to create a global public good out of them is to give them access to employment and allow them to drive GDP growth.
And presumably organizations like Reuters or Gallup can help highlight some of these challenges as well. Thank you very much. We have some time for questions, so can I suggest something? Let's take 3 questions, and we'll take them together, and then I'll direct it to the group as appropriate. The gentleman back there in the middle, yes, number 2, please. And I'll take more questions as you go along.
Good afternoon. My name is Juan Alarcon. I'm project director of the Panthera Foundation in Switzerland. I have a lot of experience with corporations. I'm also an entrepreneur. And I feel that corporations are doing very well, very professional when dealing with their own business. And this is normal, because otherwise they would have disappeared. They need to be very good. Now, when they are entering into the non-profit world, probably because they are trying to do good, they don't think that that's enough. Or they think it's enough, and they are not doing well. And they're very unprofessional. Not all of them, this is clear. But this is probably 90% of them are not professional when dealing in the non-profit world. And I think that is something, I'm not only thinking of the big corporations, because now the corporate social responsibility is going down to many other enterprises, that could be changed because there is a lot of money wasted.
Got it. So if I understand correctly, your question is, there seem to be two faces of corporates in some ways. There is the very efficient and professional face that is for the goals, the commercial goals, and then there's this sort of feel-good face, which is not particularly efficient or seemingly professional. And is that true? And why that big? Okay, got it. Thank you very much.
you.
We'll take two more questions. Up here, please.
I just wanted to say that I'm astonished because we're talking about redefining corporate practices for doing good. And in the last two sessions, we've heard a lot about the need for new jobs in Africa, around the world, in India, per year, per month. Amazing figures like 1 million a month. And I'm thinking, I haven't heard anything about the damages of climate change towards food, agriculture, which is such an urgent emerging problem that we have to address very quickly. So you have need of jobs on one side, you have this problem on the other. Why don't corporates think of creating jobs in order to put something like biochar? We heard about fertilizers being so expensive in India, so difficult to put in place. Fertilizer is not the solution. Biochar is. Chinese are starting to know that, and the Chinese government is starting to get interested in biochar, which is an easy process of our ancestors 10,000 years.
Yeah.
So I'm just questioning why corporate practices are not trying to do something to mitigate the problems that will come because of climate change, like agriculture.
Great. So, and relatedly create jobs. I had the privilege of sharing a ride with Paul Pullman yesterday, and I know he's actively involved, so perhaps we'll hear about that, but also from the panel. Do you sense that corporations have different standards of professionalism or efficiency when it comes to doing their job, as in the commercial job, versus doing their good for society job? Have you experienced it one way or the other? Anyone on the panel?
We experience it all the time. I think that we have to be careful of making too many assumptions about shareholders and about corporations, because we live in a very, very short-term oriented world. And so whereas the data shows convincingly that a purpose-driven company, one which is able to overcome the cynicism which people have towards an entity which is driven rightly by a profit motive, when you overcome that, people know. You know, there's an old Russian proverb, a fish rots from the head down. And I think that most people are able to see when a company doesn't really mean it. In the same way as mindfulness, after you've taken care of basic human goods, is the best way to be able to have a healthy body. People know it, they see it. We see all the time, however, that even companies who are motivated to do good have very short-term shareholders. If they miss their earnings by a couple of cents, their stock can go down by 10 or 20%, and that well-meaning CEO can get chucked out. As to the question itself, the fact is most companies are not very good when it comes to the vision of the social good, whereas the NGOs are. And what the NGOs need is to be able to have the ability to execute their business plan. Companies have the ability to think about outcomes, and that's driven by profit motive, but they also have the ability to think about scale, because outcomes and scale are the matrices by which they work. If both sides stick to their knitting, you can have brilliant collaborations.
Yeah, but often they don't. Jim, and then Senator. Jim, please.
When we ask millennials, that's a big shift, pay to purpose. This one's really important, though. They don't want satisfaction, they want development. So the thing about volleyball courts and badminton and free lunch and all of that isn't really what they want. They want to know if somebody will take an interest in their development. That's brand new. And so there's 7 billion people, 5 billion adults. Of the 5 billion, 3 billion of them tell Gallup they wish they had a good job, 35 hours with a paycheck and all that. But if you want to know how Rajesh's life is going and Jim's life is going, single best question you can ask us, nothing's close, is do you think anybody at work cares about your development? If he says yes and I say no, we have two very different lives. The only reason I'm saying that is that when we do our global polls of how many employees believe that their leadership cares about them, it's only like 15 or 20%. But so we're failing.
15 or 20% say that their
Leadership cares about their
by
development.
leadership, it's
The management,
of the
their
company.
supervisor, manager,
That's
it's
stunning.
actually anybody. It's actually anybody cares about your development there. But if leaders really wanted to change the world, the first thing that they had to do with CSR is develop their people, because if you took that 15 or 20% and just doubled it, that would change the world. You also wonder if it would change GDP. Maybe that thing would take off again if we managed them better. But that's a pretty big failure.
Jim, that sounds even more bleak than the question. So your implication is that, that even in the regular course
I
of
wanted
things,
to end on something really bleak.
we started on a high note, but yes.
Well, I think we already have in our lives too much generalization and categorization of individuals and groups by the attributes of some members of those groups. And I don't think we can generalize about corporations any more than we can generalize about individuals. To say that because people have a certain religion, they have certain attributes, because some of their group has it, is wrong. To take the group, we're now talking corporations, a legal entity, to attribute to all the characteristics of some, I think is a mistake. We ought to be selective in describing qualities and drawbacks of individuals as well as organizations.
Well, and what differentiates those that do good and those that do in a very don't.
There are good people, there are bad people, there are good corporations, there are bad corporations.
Thank you very much. I've been told we're almost out of time, so very quickly, any sort of sentence or two responses to the issue of how corporations are responding to climate change, or social enterprise with a specific focus on Morocco or indeed around the world. Let's start with climate change. Or should we, either way, go ahead.
For social enterprise, I mean, for me, they are the real change makers. So members of Trust Law, I have, I think, 120 fellows from Ashoka and many, many others. These are people who, in every country, step in where government withdraw because they are cutting costs, etc. With brilliant ideas, they can be helped, and they receive help. There is something now which is very important, which is impact investing, and we are helping through Trust Law a lot of that through training lawyers on what it is, etc. So I'm very optimistic, once again, in the future, because you have this new generation of people who really want to achieve something. I have personally hired in Thomson Reuters Foundation lawyers that were at Baker and McKenzie, at DLA Piper and elsewhere, that accepted a 40% cut in their salary because they do a job they love. And they were tied to do merger and acquisition. They wanted to give a purpose to their life. So what I see is that we have a real new generation of people for which the purpose is at least as important as the money.
So absolutely. So that's the optimistic part. Now, just on the point about Morocco, anything to add? Or North Africa?
Well, Morocco, it's true, it's not a big country for social enterprise, but it will come. You will see.
Okay, more optimism. On climate change.
Well, it is a fact of human life that the more remote the problem is from the specific actions of any one individual, the more difficult it is to induce action. It is also the case that when the costs are immediate and measurable, while the benefits are in the future and not precisely measurable at this time, it's also harder to make a connection. But the scope of the threat is so great that it calls for much stronger, more eloquent and aggressive leadership on the part of world leaders all over the world to keep their publics, to inform their publics, and to inspire them to act despite their natural reluctance for the reasons I've just suggested. Unfortunately, that's not the case uniformly across a large part of the world, where people are still thinking nationally and parochially and individually and not for the common good.
Thank you, Senator. In fact, that's a wonderful way of wrapping up our discussion. And it highlights the need for forums like these, where we're transcending boundaries of various kinds, not just geographic as well. It's also, the point about leadership is an important one, and let me end with just a note about leadership and about pay some homage to the individual who is really responsible for all of this. And 2 years ago, I had a conversation with Amral Daba, and he proposed this phrase called philanthropreneur. Now, I'm a believer, as an academic, if you can coin a phrase that resonates, that you've got your career made. So, if you are the guy behind bottom of the pyramid, then, everyone will remember, that's the bottom of the pyramid guy, right? So I like a phrase as much as the next guy. But I remember thinking at the time when Amr suggested it, so he's an academic at heart, that Philanthropreneur is a rather long name. And will this catch on? Because simplicity is a good thing generally in these things. Just from the number of times that phrase has been used today, and relatively easily, it's quite clear that you could be an academic, Amra, among other things. I'm not sure that's the best way of applying your creative energies, but I just want to say thank you for bringing us all together, offering this forum, and having an impact on this world. Thank you each to the panelists as well.
Thank you, Rajas. And actually, can I just ask our panel just to stay seated, because I wanted to end on 3 more positive points. It was electrifying, actually, to listen to, and really very exciting. And there were a lot of links, and I just wanted to bring 3 more positive points, because, Thomas, you've told everybody about the work that you do with Panthera. I do a lot of work in conservation, and Dr. Amy Dickman is a fantastic lady. She's one of our foremost conservation biologists. She protects large carnivores. She's been working in Tanzania. I was presenting an award to her very recently with Prince William, and she is a direct, because she works out of Oxford, of course. So the money that Panthera raises goes directly, and she's a very, very small project. She's reduced lion killing in Tanzania on the Ruaha project by 80%. So directly as a result. So it's just nice to see those links and the evidence of things working. So thank you very much indeed for that. And also, of course, we're going to hear from Paul shortly on the climate change issue. More good news coming out of the summit today, so we'll hear more on that. Oh, and finally, Monique, sorry, I'd like to link you up, if it's okay, over tea just shortly with some of our award winners, because we've been talking quite a bit, and we heard from the Theatre Day representatives today talking about the importance of having advocacy and legal representation. So that was in Gaza, and also for This Life in Cambodia, we've also been talking about that. So you guys need to go and speak to Monique, because obviously the work...
A few of them are already members of Trust Law, but they should all be.
Yep, come and make the most of you.
And I should note, on a positive note, we found out that Cecil did not die in vain, so thank you very much for that.
Precisely. Ladies and gentlemen, you may now leave. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.